Emily from the IQhub. I wanted to talk to you today about some careers in agriculture, and some of the occupations that people might not always think about are jobs in human resources, IT, sales, marketing, all important aspects of the agriculture industry, but they might not come to mind. There are several, however, that do come to mind that you can see on display at the IQhub. So let's go check out some careers that we have in the IQhub. A veterinarian, a researcher, a mechanic, a horticulturalist, a food scientist, a farmer, an environmentalist, a chemist, an agronomist, an agri-science and natural resources educator and FFA advisor, an ag engineer, and a soil scientist. For today's lesson, we're going to talk about how to find soil texture using a soil jar and a texture triangle. The first step is to make a soil jar. You'll need a glass mason jar, a canning lid, and a shovel. Then find a good spot outside to dig a hole, and you remove the grass and any organic matter, because that won't be in our jar. And the first section of soil is going to be your topsoil. Put that in a pile. Then you keep digging until the soil changes color, and that will be your subsoil. Set that in a separate pile. Then you take a couple handfuls of topsoil, a couple handfuls of subsoil, and fill your jar about halfway. That will be your two types of soil, subsoil and topsoil, in here together. And the rest gets filled up with water. You put your lid on tight and you shake it. And then you let it sit for about a week, and you should get some layers. The bottom layer is the sand. That's the biggest particle. The middle layer is the silt. That's the middle-sized particle. And the top layer is going to be the clay. If you get 3 types of soil particles, you have a pretty good soil sample. This is a good spot for gardening. But if you're not quite sure, that's what this activity will help you with. So then you need a ruler, and you would have to measure how high is the soil column from the bottom of the jar to the top of where your soil is at. So for today, from the very bottom with the clay, sand up to the clay, that's going to be 10 centimeters. So the total height of my soil column is 10 centimeters. Then you have to measure each individual layer. So from here to here is going to be my sand. That's going to be 7 centimeters. And then from here to here will be my silt. That will be 2 centimeters. And then your last little bit clay is 1 centimeter. So now that you know the individual layers and how tall they are, you have to divide them by the total column of soil to get a percentage. So my first one for my sand is going to be 7 divided by 10, and that ends up giving me my 0.7 or 70%. So my jar right now is 70% sand. And then I do for my next one, which will be silt, 2 divided by 10, 0.2 or 20%, and that's going to be 20% silt in my jar. And my last little bit is my clay. That would be 1 divided by 10, 0.1 or 10% clay. So now I have percentages. 70% of my jar is going to be sand, 20% is silt, and 10% is clay. And having those 3 percentages will help me with my next step, which is the texture triangle. So this is our texture triangle, and in order to use this, we take the 3 percentages we just found from our soil jar, and we have to find where all these percentages intersect and all their lines meet together. So for clay, we found was 10%. Clay is all of these arrows going on the left side of the triangle. So I'm going to make a line at 10% for my clay, and that's going to be the 10% line on my triangle, and hopefully that will be easy enough for you guys to see. I write right on here when I'm doing this with students. It's easier for them to figure this out. So clay is the blue line going straight across. Silt was 20%, And that is all the lines going on a diagonal down this way, just like my arrow's representing. So if silt is 20%, I find my 20 on the right-hand side, and I go down on a diagonal, and I'm trying to figure out where my lines would intersect. Make this a little darker for you. So that's for my silt. And then my third percentage I'm looking for is sand. Remember, sand was 70%, and sand is all of these lines that go diagonal up. So I find the 70, and I draw that line straight up, and where my purple, my blue, and my green intersect is right here. So if I outline this texture spot, which goes all the way to the edge, I guess, it says sandy loam. So this whole dark line, anything that has an intersecting point in the middle is going to be a sandy loam. So we intersect right here, and this is what soil we have. So anytime you guys are gardening, when you get all three types of soil particles together, if you hear the word loam, that's a good thing. So we have a sandy loam right now for our garden. This should be a good spot for us to grow something. This is a soil jar that we took a sample of from a farm, and you can kind of see the layers in the jar, but sometimes it's hard to tell specifically what's going on with the sand, silt, and clay, especially when you have some darker soils. So I always take a sample out of the topsoil and the subsoil and let them dry. It's kind of interesting how moisture in the soil can really affect the color and the consistency of what's going on. So even though this soil has a pretty dark topsoil and a pretty light subsoil, you don't really see that in the jar. But as they settle over the week, it's really interesting to kind of see how the different particle grains will go from biggest to smallest. So this is a pretty good soil sample with the dark topsoil and light subsoil. This is another soil sample that we took and made a soil jar. This one is super hard to see the layers. But like I said, I took a sample out of the topsoil and subsoil and let them dry, and you can definitely tell there's two types of soils. The soil particles here are making a difference on the plate, but don't show up so well in the jar. So that's why it's important to do both. The topsoil is a little darker on the tray, and it seems a little more fine, maybe some more silt mixed in, but the subsoil is definitely lighter on the tray, it's because of the clay. And if you can look closely, the clay chunks actually have some yellows, some grays. We call that mottled. So if you have a mottled subsoil, usually this could be a more wet soil. We have a problem with drainage. If you had a subsoil like we did in our last picture that was a bright subsoil, that's usually pretty dry. That one is bright. So this is what we call a dark or a mottled subsoil, has a problem usually with drainage. And this is what we call a light or a bright subsoil, which usually has a problem with drought. So you want something between these two so your soil is not too wet or too dry. So this was a fun activity that you can do at your house, and this gives you a little insight to what a soil scientist might do. They have to do these soil samples for the farmers and the researchers and people who need to know what's going on in the soil to grow the crops for the food we eat. And they also can help the homeowners so they can know more about their lawn, their fruit trees, their gardens, their flowers. It's a really cool job. You get to be outside, you get to work in the lab, you get to probably meet and talk to a lot of new people. So hopefully you guys can check out that career, or at least check out this lesson and go do some soil samples at your house.